great if we were in that situation. We are not. The left government is far too large, and the left commands far too much of both government power and private sector power working in conjunction with government, which is the actual definition of fascism. And I believe in many ways we're becoming a fascist country where there is a union of the secular humanist left with big business working in concert. Doesn't mean that they always have to outright collude, but working in alignment because their interests are aligned, working to inflict a culture war upon America, and particularly upon any Americans who have traditional values, who believe in things like marriage is one man and one woman, and that children should be affirmed always in their sexuality, and that it's not sexuality, in their sex, excuse me, that they should be affirmed in their sex, and that kids who are confused need counseling, not pharmaceuticals and castration, those kinds of things. So he has punched back incredibly hard, and it's one of the things that I personally, most admire about him, because big business has unfortunately become a really powerful vehicle of the left, and Disney is certainly a front and center example. Disney, who, the biggest, most powerful private employer in the state of Florida, who decided to insert itself into an area of curriculum and policy where it had no business, because, of course, the protecting young children from sexual indoctrination, which had nothing to do with gay. Gay was not in the bill. It was not a don't say gay, but protecting young children from sexualized curriculum and sexualized indoctrination was something that the people of Florida, overwhelmingly through their legislature and through Governor DeSantis, decided that they wanted to protect those people. Disney objected and inserted and flexed its corporate muscle, its massive corporate muscle, into that debate, and Governor DeSantis punched back hard. I think it's very telling, by the way, that a number of very prominent Republicans leapt to the defense of Disney. Donald Trump did, at least in an indirect way, and in a very direct way, Nikki Haley and Mike Pence did, right? Leapt to the defense of Disney, which I think shows us these battle lines, and that a lot of folks out there, even, well-meaning, generally conservative people, don't understand what time it is right now in America, and don't understand culturally and sociologically what is happening to us. So, and in some ways, I call it a culture war, but in some ways it's almost a civilizational war. I mean, it's even deeper than that. And in my view, Governor DeSantis, again, has been the most effective, not just at strong words. Strong words are important, but in terms of strong words plus implementation, has been the most effective political leader in America at actually saying, no, we on the right, and by the way, not even just we on the right, sensible people. I mean, people who believe in things that have been self-evident to humanity for thousands of years, things that are intrinsic to the Judeo-Christian ethic. That we're going to defend these things, and we're going to use government power to work against you, because we have no other choice. It would be nice, theoretically, if we didn't have to use government power, but we do. There's simply no small government solution to things like drag time story hour taking place in public libraries in the state of Florida. Right. And thankfully, he has said that's not going to happen here. And we're going to stop that. And we're not banning books. People are free to read whatever book they want in their home. But these books are not going to be in taxpayer-funded institutions, compulsory institutions, I might add, where people literally have to send their children, and they're not going to be subjected to this kind of garbage. So, I don't think he's going too far. I don't think it's an overstep. I don't think it's an exaggeration. As a matter of fact, I think it's a really refreshing salvo that finally, the right is waking up and saying, no, we're going to fight back with this, and we're going to use government power to do it when we need to, which is often.
Even though our motto is limited government.
Look, I wish.
And on this, Steve, I'm not so much with the LGBTQ. I get it. I've covered some events. I get it with the LGBTQ. I think it's absolutely outrageous that some of these books and allowing kids to go to these venues. Governor DeSantis, I believe through one of his secretaries, and you can correct me on this, pulled a liquor license or an alcohol beverage permit for one of the venues that allowed one of those drags to happen. But, Disney inserts itself. But I mean, Disney's been going on for a while, and this will be my last question, because it just kind of I'm just not grasping the Disney thing. I get it, but at what point does the governor and the government take its foot off a private company's neck?
Yeah, I would say when they stop acting politically, when they stop acting in complete alignment with the administrative state, with the permanent political class, which is which is largely governed by leftist cultural Marxist philosophies. Like, let me give you another example outside of Disney. So, and there's a lot of companies, unfortunately, I
Sure.
could go on and on with this, but one that really sticks in my head is CVS. So, CVS subjected its employees, its hourly employees, right, working class folks who stock the shelves, subjected them, and a lot of companies are doing this, unfortunately, to this, supposedly racial sensitivity training, right? When you look at the actual training, what's actually in there is it's all about trying to make white people feel guilty, right? So, a white guy who's working hard at CVS making $15 an hour is told that he has privilege by his employer, right? Can he object? Of course he can't, right? Unless he wants to get fired. So the only answer there, again, there's no small government answer here. Again, in theory, yeah, I'm for limited government. But right now, am I for it in this moment? No, I'm not. I'm for actually really aggressive government to protect people, to protect workers, to protect families and children. I believe in protectionism, by the way, broadly. That's a term that is considered a dirty term. I believe in it economically. I think we should be protecting American industry against predatory trade practices. And by the way, I used to be the opposite. I used to be very much of a Wall Street Republican. Donald Trump, God bless him, changed my mind on a lot of this. Most of it, as a matter of fact, and sort of turned me into a raging populist because he opened my eyes to the fact that, for example, in trade, we don't have free trade. We've always had managed trade, but it's been managed against the interests of American workers in favor of the Chinese Communist Party and American multinationals and, frankly, the ruling class in the United States. Similarly, when it comes to these cultural issues, we, I think, don't have the luxury, unfortunately, of sort of falling back on some sort of Jeffersonian ideal that, well, we have to have limited government. I mean, no, limited government, that philosophy, or at least, or that mindset, I think is a losing mindset of we're going to be the aggrieved outsiders. We're going to have no power. And then let's say you're a middle class person who doesn't have the money or the ability to send your kids to a quality private school. They're going to go to the public school where they're going to be told that there are 40 sexes. Okay, no, we have to stop this. And the only way to stop it is the only way to stop the fascistic reality that we face right now in the United States. And it really is fascism, right? This alignment of leftist political power and leftist ideology with big business. The only way to stop it, the only thing powerful enough to thwart it, is government.
I appreciate it, Steve. All right. Let me go over to Mark. I know Mark has a couple questions, and then I'm going to hop down to Mr. McCabe from OAN, and then Robert Bowes. And I think that's probably going to be it unless somebody requests. I'm kind of screening questions tonight. So if you have them, you can DM me. You can request to come up. But as of right now, those are the only two outside of our hosting. And Chris, I know you. So if you want to fire one out, that's fine as well. So, Mr. Naughton, let me. I think that's the first time I probably ever called you Mr.
Feels so
Naughton,
formal tonight.
ever in my life.
Yeah.
So, all right, Mark.
Yeah.
Take it away.
Thanks, Steve. You and Crypto pretty much covered most of it. So I'll just hit some gaps here, right? I listened. I hear need. I hear necessity, right? The GOP guys, this is necessary. Got to choose DeSantis, right? But okay, it's normally good business, Steve. You're a businessman. However, the MAGA people labeled cult-like, they're super loyal, and when they think about disloyalty, where and how is Team DeSantis going to win over people who like loyalty? Look what happened January 6th, right? Loyal people. How's he going to bring them over?
Yeah. Listen, I think through convincing them that the principal loyalty, the ultimate loyalty, our North Star has to be to our country and to our ideals, to our principles, and to the movement, not to any political figure in an unending way, right? As much as we might admire those political figures. And I also believe, again, that we're going to convince people. I hope we will. I was certainly convinced of this by Governor DeSantis as somebody who, again, worked really, really hard on behalf, and I think, frankly, really effectively on behalf of Donald Trump for a very long time, was convinced that the highest of ideals mean very little right now if we don't gain power. And we continue to get crushed by the left because we're out of power. And the main reason we're out of power is because we're losing elections that are winnable, because our philosophy is not a losing philosophy, but our tactics, election tactics, and that's a whole other topic, which obviously would take probably a whole other space to get into in terms of ballot harvesting and the problems with, what the left has done in terms of its election tactics and all of that. But between election tactics and leadership, though, and again, here I also say and leadership, we can't keep doing the same thing and expect markedly different results. And given that, and I understand and respect the loyalty, but given that, I believe that over time, it hasn't happened yet, but over time, I think we're going to convince a majority of the patriotic populist right in this country, of Republican voters in this country, that this is the way forward. This is the way for us to win. And then once we win, to really, really implement our agenda in a significant way.
Steve, thanks for that. It still seems a little bit need and necessity. I'm wondering this, okay? I'm not a campaign guy. I don't work on a campaign, but I talk to these people on the streets all the time. I listen to them. I'm wondering what would the camp say about a blanket automatic? You elect me, Trump's going to get pardoned. End this story. Do you think that would entice the MAGA people? DeSantis throwing that out, a guaranteed pardon.
Sure. Listen, it's not my purview to make that decision, which I'm sure you can appreciate.
Right. Yes.
But
that's
as
the mentality that I'm talking to the people. They want guarantees. They want, necessity. These are people, then they're going to prison. So a lot of people are going to prison and necessity doesn't scare them.
No, and it's outrageous, of course, that they're going to prison, right? And we have two systems of justice clearly in this country right now. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we have a parallel, unaccountable government. That parallel, unaccountable government was not brought to heel by Donald Trump in office. And I don't think it's because he didn't want to. I think it's because he didn't have the discipline and focus to implement. I think he had absolutely the right ideas. He was, the disruptor we needed, exactly the disruptor we needed at the time we needed him. He opened a lot of eyes out there. He awakened America to what China was doing to us, to an open border. He awakened us to what our very own federal government was doing to us, the ways that they were abusing us and violating the Constitution and violating just, simple precepts of justice, quite frankly, in this country. But he wasn't able to bring it to heel. And my argument is, and I actually wrote a different article about this. I'm like, if you want justice for Trump, and this might seem paradoxical. I mean, it is paradoxical, but if you want justice for Trump, and I do, and people like Trump, not just him, other people who have been unfairly targeted and persecuted for their political views, then paradoxically, you don't want to elect Trump as president for a couple of reasons. Number one, because if he is elected president, it immediately becomes all about Donald Trump rather than about the corruption that exists, about the parallel government, about the total lack of accountability. It becomes only about him. I mean, that's just the reality of how our political system works, and particularly how the corporate media, the completely corrupted and poisoned corporate media in this country work. So instead, let's elect somebody who largely shares the same philosophy as Donald Trump, but has shown us an ability to implement, and I believe will bring the kind of steely resolve to breaking that administrative state, which will be a Herculean task. I mean, it would be unbelievably difficult. Don't get me wrong. I mean, even for the greatest, if we could resurrect George Washington, it would be difficult for him to do it. But I firmly believe when we look at the executives out there or potential executives in the country right now in the political landscape, I think no one has a better shot at doing it, has a better temperament, record and agenda and philosophy and ideology to do that, in my view, than Ron DeSantis. I believe firmly he will achieve justice. I mean, we can't go back in time, unfortunately, and undo the injustices that have already been inflicted. But we can, from day one and going forward, make sure that we smash this system, which is so just egregiously abusive of the American people.
Thanks, Steve. Just two more quick ones, then we'll go to McCabe. I think you said Trump had 3 straight losses, right, in your opening. I thought about this. 2018, GOP picks up 2 Senate seats. Paul Ryan, under his leadership, there was roughly 40 unopposed Democrats in that election. And then DeSantis got elected governor, which we all can probably admit that, Trump made that happen. 2020, some say not a normal election, so they want to write that one off for Trump. And 2022, things have been improving. GOP wins the House. Trump's choice is the speaker. Okay, that happened. And midterms and support numerically is rising. So where are those losses, Steve, that you're talking about?
Yeah, well, listen, I think we need to be very honest with ourselves, though. I mean, 2022 was a massive loss relative to expectations, right? Given the state of the country, given how miserably Joe Biden was governing, given how deeply unpopular he and his agenda were, the terrible economy that Americans, particularly middle class Americans, are enduring and were enduring, of course, last fall during 2022, and given the historical precedent of massive first midterm election losses for the governing party, I think any honest assessment is we got creamed. Right now, am I thrilled that we took control of the House? Of course, absolutely great. But again, let's be honest with ourselves. About where we are, having a very very slim majority in the House, and losing really winnable Senate races, in places like Georgia, for example, where that was a seat that absolutely could have and should have been won. We have to be honest with ourselves. Those are losses, right? It's an outright loss in Georgia, and it's a loss relative to expectations in the House. And a loss in Nevada, a loss in many states that were winnable states. I think that the table was set for us to have a magnificent wave election, and we didn't have anything like that. While I'm happy, and grateful for the wins, and we'll take them, and we got to use them the best we can. There's no, I don't think you can convince an objective person that was a great outcome for our movement.
So last one for me. Thanks, Stephen. We'll go right to McCabe. I recall this in the beginning of Trump's first campaign, 12, 14, highly capable career politicians. Trump knocked them off one by one by one. Where on the debate stage, right? He is pro on his feet. He is. Is Ron DeSantis going to challenge him on his feet if they do the debates? Is he going to make any progress?
Well, listen, I sure believe so, but absolutely, Donald Trump is the maestro of it, right? No doubt about it, right? When he gets on the debate stage, and on his feet in front of a microphone, okay, he debates like Jack Nicklaus played golf, right? There's no doubt about it. So, again, I've always been very honest and upfront about this. This is an uphill battle in a lot of ways. I think it's a winnable battle. I absolutely think we have a path, right? It's not an impossible task, but it's a difficult task, and it's an uphill task. And regarding debates, I firmly hope that Donald Trump decides that he will debate, in part because he's so dang good at it. He should, but more importantly, I think he owes it to the country. I think he owes it to Republican voters to step on that stage. And of course, he's at least indicated that he doesn't want to do that. I think that would be a great disservice to the country and great disrespect even to his own supporters if he refuses to get up there and debate. But to get to your question of how is Ron the debater that Donald Trump is? No, he isn't. But can he make his points really, really effectively? Yes, I think he can. I also think that because he is now in the national media spotlight and getting a lot more reps at that level, in my view, as a media guy, as a guy who does this for a living, who talks on TV and radio and podcasts for a living, I think he's getting better and better. I think he's got the record to back up his increasing acumen, at succeeding on his feet. And so do I think he can go toe to toe with Donald Trump and make his points effectively while respecting what Donald Trump has done and while having admiration for the successes that he achieved? Yes, I do. I think he can do all that. But, again, admittedly, if it's a prize fight going into that fight, is Ron DeSantis the underdog? Absolutely. Of course he's the underdog. But can he win? Yes, I also think he can win.
All right, I appreciate it. All right, so we have looks like we have 4 here that we're going to go with. Let me go to McCabe first with OAN, and go ahead, buddy.
Hey, Crypto Mark, thanks for having me on. Another phenomenal, just boffo spaces that you guys are hosting. Thank you. Hey, Steve, very good to talk to you for the first time.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
So my name is Neil McCabe. I'm a national political correspondent at One American News. My question is, it's accepted everywhere that Trump is competitive with Biden despite 2 indictments. Mm-hmm. Why wouldn't Trump beat Biden if he was endorsed and championed by DeSantis? It seems like your thesis is that Trump cannot beat Biden. But if DeSantis wasn't running, wouldn't DeSantis be campaigning for Trump, and certainly couldn't DeSantis put Trump over the top?
Well, listen, McCabe, I appreciate the question. I don't want to get into the hypothetical of, Trump is the nominee and what will, Governor DeSantis then do, because I fully intend on him being the nominee, right? So I don't want to go down that road yet. I would say regarding Trump, though, I certainly will answer your question regarding Trump and his the massive challenges in front of him in terms of winning the general election. When we look at independent voters, when we look at the current, and even the current polling, even in polling where they show Donald Trump doing reasonably well, either neck and neck with Ron DeSantis, or in some cases winning on a national level. Again, not that those polls elect the president. Of course, we have an electoral college. Swing states are what really matter. But in those polls, generally, and you can cherry pick certain ones, but generally, Ron DeSantis does better among independents than does Donald Trump. But again, even outside of the polling, what I think is more important than polling, because we all know that polling can be skewed, can be manipulated, can be just wrong, is let's just look at actual votes. And again, when I look at actual votes, when I look at what Ron DeSantis did in a major state, so it's not like it's some outlier state. It's a state that's very representative of the United States on the whole, demographically and in very many ways. When I look at what he did in 2022, he proved to us that he can absolutely win new voters, and win them by the legions. I mean, not just by a small margin. To win on an election night, which I believe was massively disappointing relative to expectations, to win his state by 19% after 4 years earlier having won it by less than 1% is a magnificent achievement. And I think it shows that he has the kind of appeal, the kind of personal popularity, and the kind of agenda, most importantly, and philosophy to win over those independents. Because the reality is, too, after Donald Trump being on center stage for many years, he is totally unfairly hated by a lot of independents. And I believe it's unfair and it's illogical, but it's a reality. And we have to deal in the realm of reality. And those independents, particularly a lot of women, particularly a lot of college educated folks, a lot of suburban voters, there is such a roadblock for them mentally that no matter how bad things are with Biden, in my view, the only person they will not vote for over Joe Biden is Donald Trump.
And that's but I mean, that's even with DeSantis campaigning for him and endorsing him. Like, DeSantis is incapable of helping Trump win.
Again, I don't want to get into those theoreticals because I intend on making DeSantis the nominee, right? So I don't want to get into that part. But I would say this too: no matter what, I mean, no matter who is helping Donald Trump, and I expect, I hope all Republicans are going to be, all conservatives are going to be voting for the Republican nominee, because we're going to have a conservative Republican nominee. But no matter who is helping from the sidelines, when Trump is such a heat sink and is so polarizing that I don't know that many outside actors matter a whole lot when Trump's on the ballot, if that makes sense.
No, I take your point. Thank you for the question. Crypto, Mark, thanks, guys.
Thanks, McCabe. Of course. Let me head over to Robert. He was next, and I'm going to go to Christopher and Carice, and then we'll wrap for the night here. So, Robert, go ahead.
Thank you, folks. Just three quick thoughts for discussion. And Steve, you're great spokesman for Governor DeSantis.
Thank you.
There's a little arbitrage going on, though, and you know arbitrage. I think the comment about amnesty, and I think the implication is that Governor DeSantis would be tougher on immigration than Donald Trump. I think that's a stretch, but it's also interesting to see that I'm not sure it's another Never Back Down PAC or the campaign directly, but the Koch Foundation, Koch brothers, have reported to have spent tens of millions of dollars to help Ron DeSantis. And the Kochs are radical open border people, right? So how can you have
right?
It doesn't square with me.
Sure.
You got will the governor swear off the Koch money? That's one thing. Second thing, the nice 31-point swing between DeSantis' 18 performance and his 22 performance, 31 points you said, and that's great. I would attribute some of that to robust election integrity measures passed in Florida.
Sure.
And 500,000, people fleeing from oppressive tyranny from the north to come down to help in the free state of Florida. So,
right.
and then obviously a successful governor. Ron DeSantis is a very successful governor. He's got a great legislature. It's sort of nirvana there for him. And lastly, on the breaking the administrative state, there's no in my view, there's no one more disruptive, and people might call it polarizing, but I think disruptive is probably the better word, to just break the deep state, the administrative state. And I really don't feel, and maybe you can help me, but I don't feel that Governor DeSantis is going to be any any different than any other, consultant advised politicians in trying to break the administrative state when he can't even call out these indictment hoaxes?
Well, first, he was very, just on that last point. I mean, he was very forceful in saying that the Alvin Bragg New York indictment was an absolute sham, and it was. And I think all of us should be outraged. Every American should be outraged, but certainly those of us on the political right. Regarding those advantages that you cite that led to, at least in part, to his landslide victory in 2022. You're exactly right. Okay. Things like robust election integrity and attracting hundreds of thousands of, effectively political and cultural refugees to the free state of Florida. Absolutely. Did they help him? Were they winning behind his sales? Absolutely. But I would also say he earned those advantages because they were due to his, really effective governance. So I don't think we can view those apart from Ron DeSantis. I mean, yes, he reaped the benefits of his own amazing policies. But I'm glad you asked about the Koch brother aspect and sort of this big donor thing, because one objection I get a lot, particularly from sort of regular folks, not activists and people who are professionally in the game, but just regular concerned citizens, is they don't like some of the people who are supporting Ron DeSantis, who want Ron DeSantis to be president. And I totally get that and understand it. And by the way, I don't like a lot of those people either. A lot of them are in favor of DeSantis not because they believe in Ron DeSantis policies, right? Not because they're patriotic populists, but because they despise Donald Trump. And they correctly, though, or they're smart enough to ascertain that the only legitimate threat in the primary to Donald Trump is Ron DeSantis. I firmly believe that, let's say they get their wish and Donald Trump is not the nominee, and in fact Ron DeSantis is, and he becomes president of the United States, they're going to be very, very disappointed with what they ended up with in a President DeSantis, because he has, again, made it very clear time and again he's willing to counter the wishes of his donors, to directly counter them, do the opposite in many cases. The donor class, for example, does not want him engaging in the cultural war, does not want him signing pro-life legislation, which he did in the state of Florida. He does it anyway, and he does it out of principle. And the Koch brothers, as far as their money, look, it's not being spent. I guess I would take small issue of it is being spent against Donald Trump on their own volition. There is zero coordination, cooperation of any kind with anybody at the PAC, at the DeSantis campaign. They do what they want. If there's one thing we know about that Koch network, they certainly don't take direction from anybody, from the president of the United States, from governors, from anybody else. They have an axe to grind against Donald Trump. Is it possible that their efforts will help Ron DeSantis? Sure, it's possible. I don't know, but that is not a volitional move. It is not a purposeful move in any sense of Ron DeSantis. And there are people out there, again, who, because they so despise Trump, they are, at least right now, saying that they'll back Ron DeSantis. And they're not people that we would find to be our ideological kin in any sense. And I get that, and I understand that, right? But again, they're fixated with a toxic never Trump mentality that is not in alignment with Ron DeSantis or with what we are trying to do in this campaign or in the broader effort, sort of Team Ron. And I'm of the view, by the way, speaking of toxicity, Never Trump is an absurdity, and it's totally in every way just objectionable, right? And not patriotic and illogical. I also think Only Trump is just as illogical. I really do. I think it's just as illogical, and I hope that we can convince people of that over time, that we need to be only America. Right. And we need to be never leftists and never cultural Marxists. And that is where we belong. So, we'll see where those things shake out. But I appreciate the question. And it's a valid objection, and one that I hear quite a lot.
All right. Well, thank you. We'll see you in 13 months or so with the convention. We definitely need a fiscal conservative, Steve, and social conservative like you are back on the Trump team at that time.
Thanks, Reverend. I appreciate it. All right, let me head over to. Actually, I'm gonna go to Carice first, and then Chris, I'm gonna wrap with you, buddy. So, Carice, all yours, bud.
Expect to be skipped over, I guess, or not brought up, but I guess my question would be kind of simple. There's a lot of things you've talked about tonight in regards to President Trump. And there are aspects with the DeSantis campaign, just to kind of talk about myself for a moment. I do a lot of accidental defending of DeSantis because I'm in Uncle Luke rooms. Uncle Luke from the 2 Live crew, Florida resident, hates DeSantis. So that leads me to understand Florida politics a lot. And so my question revolves around the fact that in the minority community, DeSantis seems to already have gone against the First Step Act. And I find that ironic that in your statement earlier, you said, we don't want to go with these Jeffersonian principles because, you want to use the state, you want to use the powers of the state in all these different ways. But if you think about the First Step Act, legitimately, you could use some of those powers to release J6ers. So when DeSantis goes against the First Step Act, you're essentially going against something that you could use to get people who've been wrongly prisoned out of jail, out of these federal systems. So I find it kind of interesting that that DeSantis openly stands against that. And then my other question would be, what has Ron DeSantis done in the state of Florida that was a success for the Black community? Now, I know the answer to that question because I legitimately talk Black politics and Florida politics, but I'm not sure if the DeSantis campaign does. But the Trump community understands their victories for the Black community all the time. So how is DeSantis going to retain the margins that Trump gained in the minority community, especially when he's attacking the First Step Act openly? And that's probably my biggest question.
Regarding First Step Act, and if people are curious about this, is another subject that I've written an op-ed about, which you can find if you're curious to see that. Also put it up at Real Clear Politics. I concur fully with the governor in believing that the First Step Act is a jailbreak. And the reason I say that, it might have been passed.
So I'll just give you the answer to the Florida one. Ron DeSantis helped fund historically Black colleges to a record level because of the fact that there were some failing aspects of institutions, Bethune-Cookman being one of those. That was his victory to Black community. But I don't know if you guys can hear me.
Yep, can hear you fine. And by the way, I'll address that then quickly, just regarding the minority community, particularly Hispanics, which of course are a massive voting bloc in the state of Florida. Ron showed, and by the way, Donald Trump made unbelievable gains there, something that he should be rightly really, really proud of, something I'm proud to have been a part of that effort, a trend that I think is very young and just beginning of Hispanics moving to the political right, thank goodness, in this country. He won 60% in his reelection, he won 60% of the Hispanic vote, another reason that he won such a massive landslide, and not just, the normally conservative Cubans of South Florida, but massively outperformed expectations among all different Latin ethnic groups, including Puerto Ricans, typically very Democratic, did very well among Puerto Ricans in Central Florida. So his performance among minorities, I think, speaks for itself, both in terms of governing, but then certainly in terms of their validation of him electorally. But, getting back to the First Step Act, the reality is I think America has an under-incarceration problem, not an over-incarceration problem. I think we see that from the violence, which is increasingly just savaging our streets. And the First Step Act, while it may have had good intentions, the reality is it was not as sold, where it's just sort of nonviolent grandmothers being released. When we look at the actual data of who's been released, and I cite Fox News and particularly Tucker Carlson in my article, and it's hard to get data on this, unfortunately, because the federal government doesn't want to give it out very readily. But of the first batch that was released, approximately a third of them were released, were incarcerated for violent crimes and were released early. And a great number of them have committed extremely heinous crimes once early released. And the one that I start the article with and highlight is the criminal who literally had been out of jail a day, released early, had been out of jail a day before he decided to nearly kill a staffer, totally unprovoked, daytime attack on Capitol Hill, a staffer of Rand Paul. And that's just, one very terrible, but one significant example of people who are released early. I don't believe that we want to be the party of letting people out of jail early. I don't believe that we have too few people in jail. I think law and order has to be an absolute hallmark of our movement, of our party, of winning the presidency, and then governing effectively. So, no, we are not in favor of the First Step Act. I would also say this. I think it's demeaning, though, to say that the First Step Act is such a critical issue for minorities, as if minorities believe that ending up in prison is a natural part of their life. I just reject that notion. And the First Step Act, I believe, was a triumph of Jared Kushner and liberals within the White House, bringing in outsiders like Kim Kardashian to unnecessarily alter policy in a very leftward tilt that resulted in a bad bill, in a bad law that should be repealed, and which I'm glad Ron DeSantis has promised he will repeal as president.
All right, Steve, thanks. Let me head over to Chris for the final question of the night. And by the way, guys, I put a poll up. It's the only thing up in the nest or the Jumbotron, whatever you guys want to call it. I just said we had the pleasure of having Steve Cortes in tonight. I find him to be smart and a gentleman. And I want to know if the needle moved. I want to know if anything tonight has moved, and the poll is up there. So, Chris, the floor is yours, and then we're going to wrap, buddy.
Yeah, thank you, Crypto. Steve, as a Latino, huge fan of yours. I always have been. Background on me, I have been involved in, high level transition teams but specifically on campaigns. One of the things I was involved in on a couple of occasions on some statewide campaigns, one governor's race, one Senate race, was securing surrogates. So something I noticed as a campaign operative was a lot of key surrogates leaving the Trump campaign. Right, I felt like you were one of those. You see Kayleigh McEnany. There's a few others. Immediately red flagged me. So my question on this front, and then I do have one more follow-up question as it relates to campaign. Did Team Trump not reach out to you, or was there not an effort to reach out to some of these surrogates like yourself before Team DeSantis did? Can you explain that moment? I know you talked about, obviously how you felt about, the direction of the country, but I just was curious if they dropped the ball on that side.
I can't speak for others, but for me, yes, no, there absolutely was outreach. This was just, my decision. And again, a very difficult decision after working really, really hard for President Trump for a long time. But there was, yes, to answer your question, there was outreach. I would say, though, there's a bigger issue here, which I think also I would encourage people to think about and to ponder. And that is the way that Donald Trump has been so vicious in attacking his former top staffers, whether they're federal government or campaign staffers, people like Kayleigh McEnany, who I think did an absolutely bang-up job from that podium, probably the best press secretary ever, right, and attacked her in a really, I think, just egregious and uncalled for way. If he were to be elected president, I think it would make it unbelievably difficult for him to find people of substance and gravity who want to work for him, who want to face that kind of potential of, if I leave for whatever reason, if I disagree for whatever reason, I'm going to be viciously attacked afterward by a politician who seems to somehow be to live in or to act in a way where he does not recognize that he appointed these very people. So I think that is a significant flaw and a significant potential weakness going forward that people should think about.
Yeah. And then my other question for you is obviously campaigns in the end, when you're talking about primaries and general elections, are about lists, money and votes. Right. And you see these massive crowds in Pickens, South Carolina. Thank goodness that ended before the tornado. But the point is huge crowds there. Calle Ocho, huge crowds, all these things. When you talk about the path in the primary, is there, I don't know how much you can disclose or not disclose, but in the DeSantis orbit, is there paths that you guys see as it relates to, I'm sorry, targeting primary voters that are going to turn out? And is that the game plan, is to get those people to turn out in the caucuses and primaries in order to win the delegates you need?
Sure, yes. And what I can tell you about is the extensive ground game that is already underway, well underway, particularly from our side, meaning the PAC side, particularly in those first 4 states, in Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada. And when I say ground game, I mean organizing people and particularly door knockers, both volunteer as well as paid. So we have an army of people in the field making actual person-to-person voter contact, touching voters on a very regular basis. And, regarding Trump and those massive crowds, listen, nobody can draw a crowd like Donald Trump, clearly. And that is the case today. It may be the case tomorrow, may be the case in 6 months. We'll see. But you also, I think, as somebody experienced in politics, how quickly political momentum can move. And I'm a believer that Trump is running, for now at least, a very top-down campaign, very much focused on him and his media appearances and the occasional rallies, because he's not working very hard so far, but the occasional rallies that he puts on, which are impressive, admittedly, they're impressive. A very different approach from Ron DeSantis, a much more active pace of campaigning, not as many big events, but a lot of really, really significant sort of medium-sized events combined